The year is 1916. The British Empire does not send an army to the Middle East, but a single man, alone among the Arabs, with a mission that would change the course of history. What he achieved forever reshaped the Middle East, but the price of that success he carried with him for the rest of his life. His name was Thomas Edward Lawrence, but the world remembers him as Lawrence of Arabia. At the dawn of the 20th century, the Ottoman Empire, often referred to by European politicians as the sick man of Europe, was in a deep crisis. It once ruled vast territories, but by 1914, the empire was weakened, economically exhausted, and increasingly unable to control its own provinces. The losses mounted, one after another. France seized Algeria in 1830. Britain took control of Egypt in 1882, along with the strategically vital Suez Canal, while Italy conquered Libya in 1911. In October 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered the First World War on the side of Germany. For many in Constantinople, it was a desperate attempt to save what little remained of the empire. But external threats were not the only problem. Within the empire, discontent was growing among the Arab population. The turning point came in 1908 with the Young Turk Revolution. Initially, many Arabs welcomed the fall of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, hoping for greater autonomy. However, the new government soon moved in a different direction. Instead of reforms, a policy of fierce Turkish nationalism emerged. Turkish was forced upon schools and the administration, prompting Arab intellectuals and officers to form secret societies and plan their own future. The Middle East was on the brink of profound change. Empires were fading, new movements were rising, and at this exact moment, an unusual man enters the scene, Thomas Edward Lawrence. Lawrence didn't end up in the Middle East by accident. While studying history at Oxford, he developed an obsession with medieval warfare. In 1909, at just 20 years old, he trekked hundreds of kilometers across Ottoman Syria, exploring crusader castles and their military architecture. That journey was not just an academic adventure. It was his first real encounter with the Middle East. From 1911 to 1914, Lawrence worked on archaeological excavations in the ancient city of Carchemish on the banks of the Euphrates. There he collaborated with the renowned archaeologist David Hogarth, a man who at the same time had close ties to British intelligence circles. Archaeology provided the perfect cover. While excavating ancient ruins, British explorers kept a close watch on the modern world, most notably the strategically vital Baghdad Railway, funded by Germany. During those years, Lawrence did not merely learn the Arabic dialects, he fully immersed himself in them. He adopted their tribal customs, their way of life, and their way of thinking, earning the genuine trust of the local Bedouin. To many British officers, his behavior seemed unusual, almost improper, but this very ability to understand and embrace the local culture would soon become his greatest asset. The First World War spread rapidly across Europe, but its impact soon reached the Middle East. The Ottoman Empire sided with Germany and Austria-Hungary, turning the vast expanse from Anatolia to Arabia into a new theater of war. For the British Empire, this region was of immense importance. The Suez Canal was the primary link between Europe and the British colonies in India. If the Ottoman Empire were to threaten this passage, the entire British Empire could be placed in serious peril. Because of this, Britain began searching for allies among the Arab populations living under Ottoman rule. When the war began, Thomas Edward Lawrence was assigned to the Arab Bureau in Cairo, the British intelligence agency responsible for the Middle East. There, he found himself in the middle of a complex political game. At the exact same time, Britain was making three different promises about the future of that region. The first promise was made to Sharif Hussein of Mecca. In an exchange of letters between 1915 and 1916, known as the Hussein-McMahon Correspondence, the British promised to support the creation of an independent Arab state if the Arabs launched a revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Yet those promises were vague, with the new borders left undefined, And while those letters were still being exchanged, British diplomat Mark Sykes and French representative François-Georges Picot were secretly crafting a completely different plan. The 1916 Sykes-Picot Agreement envisioned dividing a large part of the Middle East between Britain and France. Instead of a single unified Arab state, the region was to be carved up into zones of European influence. A year later came the third promise. The Balfour Declaration of 1917 expressed British support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. Thus, three different groups were given three different promises about the exact same territory. Britain promised the Arabs freedom while simultaneously planning with France to divide their land. At the very same time, it offered support for the creation of a Jewish national home. Lawrence was well aware of this contradiction. In his later writings, he admitted knowing that he was not telling his Arab allies the whole truth. He worked with Prince Faisal and his fighters, encouraging them to revolt against the Ottoman Empire, even though he knew that British policy would never fulfill its promises of full Arab independence. That realization tormented him deeply. He later wrote that he felt he was leading men into battle for a cause he was certain was doomed. Still, he believed that victories on the battlefield could change political reality, that a successful Arab revolt could create a situation where European powers could no longer ignore Arab demands for freedom. The Arab revolt began in June 1916, but immediately ran into problems. At Medina, the Turkish garrison put up fierce and stubborn resistance. The British in Cairo were skeptical of the Arabs, viewing them as unreliable, but Lawrence thought differently. He realized that the strength of the Arabs lay not in major battles, but in their unique way of fighting. He developed a strategy he called a war of detachment. This meant using the vast desert as an ally, avoiding direct conflicts, and constantly attacking the enemy's communications and supply lines. The culmination of it all was Operation Aqaba in July 1917. The city of Aqaba was a key strategic port that was nearly impossible to capture from the sea due to heavy Turkish artillery batteries. So Lawrence devised something quite unexpected. Together with the tribal leader Auda Abu Tayi and warriors from the Hawaitat tribe, he led a small group across the vast Nefud Desert. After a long and arduous journey, they attacked Aqaba from land, from a direction the Turks had left completely undefended. The revolt was no longer just a local uprising in the Hejaz. It had become a serious military force. At the same time, the Ottomans were forced to deploy thousands of soldiers along the railway line, which weakened their forces on other fronts. During that period, Lawrence also became an expert in railway sabotage. His goal was not to completely destroy the line, but to keep it in a constant state of costly and lengthy repairs. He created specialized explosives called tulip bombs. They bent the rails beyond easy repair, forcing the Turks to ship brand new parts all the way from Turkey. By the end of the war, Arab forces had destroyed 79 bridges and hundreds of kilometers of railway. As a result, the Turkish garrison in Medina was left almost completely cut off from the rest of the army. The race to Damascus in September 1918 was the last major operation in which Lawrence took part. He entered Damascus on October 1st, 1918. The city was liberated, but even then, a problem emerged. The great powers had already secretly agreed on how they would divide the Arab lands. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Lawrence worked as Prince Faisal's translator. He was one of the few Britons who openly advocated for Arab independence. He even wore Arab clothing at the conference to draw attention to their cause. But he failed. The great powers ignored Arab demands. France took control of Syria, while Britain received Iraq and Palestine. Lawrence was deeply disappointed. Because of this, he even refused an honor offered by King George V, believing that Britain had betrayed the promises it made to the Arabs. When the war ended and Britain and France partitioned the Middle East, Lawrence realized what had actually happened. The peoples who had believed in promises of freedom received new masters and new borders. Guilt then began to haunt him. He refused honors and withdrew, carrying the weight of participation in a grand deception. He remains an enduring enigma, hero, traitor, visionary, victim, a man who sought to give everything only to find he had nothing. Thomas Edward Lawrence died on May 19, 1935, aged 46, after a fatal motorcycle crash in England. He died in seclusion under an alias, escaping the myth surrounding him. Yet his shadow still looms over the Middle East, a region carved out from the broken promises he helped create.